Hi friends, welcome to Beautifully Bookish Bethany. In today's video, I'm going to be recommending to you 18 great middle grade fantasy books that are not Harry Potter. Whether you're looking for alternatives or you're looking for something new to pick up, I have a stack of 18 fantastic books, and many of these are first books in series, so it's technically a lot more than this, but we're going to go with the first books. These are all books I've read myself. Many of them I've read with my children, and I can tell you I think that they are really good. Some of these may be books that you've heard of before, some of them may be new to you, but they're all really great, and I hope you find something new to go and check out. The first category is books with magical schools, and I have 8 of them to share with you. First, if you haven't already tried it, you really need to pick up Amari and the Night Brothers by B.B. Alston. It's fantastic. It is contemporary fantasy with a girl who goes to a magic school where all kinds of magic creatures secretly exist, and she is trying to track down her lost brother. Absolutely love this. So far there's 2 books out in the series. The third one is forthcoming. I read them both. They're amazing. They're whimsical and fantastical. They've got a lot of heart and friendship and adventure, and they're really, really good if you're looking for a magic school option. Next is The School for Good and Evil by Soman Chainani, which I think is actually now a film. I haven't actually seen it, but I really love the first trilogy of the series. The second trilogy, it's a little iffier for me, but I really enjoyed this first one. It follows 2 girls who are best friends, but one of them is like ugly and weird, and one of them is really blonde and pretty, and they want to get selected for the School for Good and Evil and expect that the way they look will determine which school they get chosen for, but it ends up being flipped. One thing I like about this is that it subverts the idea that appearances matter to whether people are good or evil. Dark is bad, or like ugly is a witch, and beautiful is always good. I think it subverts it, but also you have this really strong friendship, and it does a lot of interesting things later on in the series too, of playing with gender roles and different things. So one that I'm really a fan of, I think the first trilogy is fantastic. Also great if you like fairy tales and you like school settings. I think it does a really good job with the magic school in this one. I'll be honest, a couple of these I'm using the term school loosely. Maybe it's a camp, maybe it's a place where there's learning, but I feel like some kind of a magical location that children are going to and learning magical things in. An example of this is the Nevermore series. I actually haven't continued on. I've only read the first book, but I know that there's a whole series of these. The Trials of Morrigan Crow is the first one, and it follows a girl who was born thinking that she's very unlucky, and then on her 11th birthday, she is whisked away to this magical city where she can compete for a place in the Wondrous Society, a magical organization. I think this is whimsical, but also has some heavier elements to it. I really loved it, and I think a lot of people have loved it. Again, there is an entire series of these. I think there's 4 books in the series, if I'm not mistaken. Then, for a very beloved series where the magic school is actually Camp Half-Blood, Percy Jackson is always a really good option. I know there's now the TV show, so people have been excited about that, but I do think these books are really good. We have a character who finds out that he is a demigod. He is the son of a Greek god and goes to a magical camp called Camp Half-Blood with a bunch of other gods. I mean, everybody I feel like knows the premise of this, but it's a really good one. It also draws on Greek mythology, so there's some interesting learning happening associated with this, but yeah, there's a reason that Percy Jackson has continued to be such a go-to for people. One that I haven't read in years, and I don't know if we're ever getting more in this series, is The Rhythmatist by Brandon Sanderson. This is one of the children's books that he wrote, and I really liked it. It's got a magical school with a magic system associated with like mathematics and geometry, which I think is kind of cool. So especially if you have like a nerdy kid that you think would be into that, this might be a good one to pick up. Then of course, as they sort of age up, Sanderson has a lot of fantasy books and some science fiction books for teenagers and for adults, but I think this is a really good middle grade option. Or if you are looking for a kind of unusual place to start trying him out yourself, maybe give The Rhythmatist a try. I don't remember a lot of the details of this because it's been a long time since I read it, but I do remember really enjoying it. Then for the first book in a very long series that I would recommend for upper middle grade and even lower YA is the Keeper of the Lost Cities series. This one has more romantic subplots in it, so depending on the child you have on the younger end, like the 8-year-old, it might not quite be for them, but I feel like this is going to be the kind of thing that will appeal to that middle age of like upper middle grade into lower YA, where it can be kind of hard to find books that are good for them. This follows a girl named Sophie who discovers that she is actually a magical elf from this world she didn't know existed and goes to it. She goes to a magical school there and her life changes, and there's lots of danger, there's love triangles, there's magical creatures. I have read the first several books in the series and I've really enjoyed them. They're a lot of fun, they're easy to read, and I think a lot of people would enjoy them. Good one to have on your radar for a magical school. One of my favorite books from last year is a small town kind of cozy fantasy that does have a magical school, even though it doesn't feature super prominently in the story. That is Just a Pinch of Magic by Alicia Dow. This follows two girls who become friends who are trying to figure out how to stop a curse on their small town. They're learning their magic. Their dads are kind of into each other, so there's maybe an adult romantic subplot happening. There's baking magic and danger and friendship and family, and it is delightful. So highly recommend this one. I think it's great. I hope that we get more in this series because I would love to read more of their hijinks in the future, and it's just such a lovely, cozy little small town. So definitely check that one out. My final recommendation for a magical school series is the Circle of Magic books by Tamara Pierce. I love these so much. Last year we did a read along on my channel for the first two quartets, and I think that these are so underhyped. They're out of print, so they can be a little bit hard to get your hands on, but they're really fantastic. They follow 4 kids, mostly orphans, who have kind of unusual magic, who for one reason or another end up at this magical temple where they are taught, and it has involved great grown-ups, it has found family, it has kids working through their trauma in age-appropriate ways, it's got magic and danger, and like, it's so, so good. Highly recommend this entire series. The first one is Sandry's book, but yeah, really good. Scholastic needs to put these back in print. The next category is portal fantasies. I've got 3 of those. And then for the rest, I really don't have a good category for them, but they're still great. So stay tuned for those. Miscellaneous middle grade fantasy of various kinds. But for portal fantasy, first up is Tristan Strong Punches a Hole in the Sky by Kwame Mbalia. This is the first book in a trilogy. I have read the first 2 books so far, and they're great. These follow a Black boy from Chicago who is grieving the loss of his best friend and ends up finding himself thrust through a portal into this world populated by characters from African and African American myths and legends, including John Henry, who you see on the cover, among others, and he has to try to find a way to save this world. It's so good. I've read this a couple of times. I've read it with my kids, and I just think it's really fantastic. Both books that I've read so far are really great. Highly recommend those. And while there's danger and some heavier moments, it's also really funny. The humor in this is fantastic, and it's got great characters. And if this is too long, there's a graphic novel, which is adapted really well. Then we have Cameron Battle and the Hidden Kingdoms by Jamar J. Perry. There is a second book in this series out. I haven't read the second one yet, but I think the first one is really good. It follows a kid who also is dealing with grief. His parents have died. He's living with his grandma, and he discovers that his ancestors are actually from this magical kingdom that he gets sucked back to with his 2 best friends. It gives me like fantasy Wakanda vibes. That's kind of the vibe. This like magical African kingdom that was walled away from everything else early on when the slave trade was happening, and it's really good. This one is a little more intense in terms of having fighting and battle scenes, but really love it. I love the friendship, and it's also great for super low-key queer representation. We get hints at the fact that maybe he has a little bit of a crush on one of his best friends. It doesn't really go anywhere with it. I don't know if book 2 does, but it's a good kind of like chill version of that for middle grade that's casual. So that's also cool. My final recommendation for a middle grade portal fantasy is one that's really fun. I had this for review a couple years ago. This is Champion's Quest: The Die of Destiny by Frank L. Cole. And this follows characters who end up in a real life role-playing game. It's like Portal Fantasy, but into this game they have to play that is kind of similar to Dungeons and Dragons. It's really fun, it's entertaining, and I think this is a great option, especially for anybody who's into D&D. I know my kids are pretty into it, so this might be a good one to pick up. On to my final recommendations that don't necessarily have a specific category, but one series that I think has been incredibly popular with actual kids, but I don't see talked a lot about on YouTube is the Wings of Fire series by Tweety Sutherland. This is the first one. You can tell it has been well loved by my child. These are really, really good. They are fantasy novels that feature dragon characters, and the first book I would say is pretty violent, more than I think I was expecting. What's funny is I know that my oldest kid was sort of like, well, it's different because they're dragons. So for whatever reason, apparently the violence when it's with dragons doesn't hit the same way, for him at least, but it might be intense for some readers. That said, I love it. The characters are so well developed. The friendships are excellent. It's fun. There's a lot of lore about the dragons and the world, which if you've got a kid who's into those kinds of little details, that's a great plus. And the other thing that I like about this, because I've now read, I think the first 6 books in the series, they do a really great job of integrating these bigger issues in a kid-friendly way through these dragons. And they're big things, and I don't know that the kids necessarily realize what they're getting through them. So it deals with things like racism and racial supremacy, but with dragons, obviously. It deals with forced medical experimentation and the trauma of that. It's got a book with a character that I think is probably neurodivergent. There's just a lot of nuanced things that are done very, very well for this age group. So I feel like more people should really be reading these because they're great and my kids love them. I can see why they're such a hit with kids. There are also graphic novels, but yeah, really good. So Wings of Fire. Another underrated book that I would love to see more people read, and I'm excited to see what we get in book 2, is A Benny's Song by P. Djèlí Clark. This is an African-inspired middle grade fantasy novel following a young girl whose entire town is taken and she escapes with this magical woman and tries to find a way to figure out what's going on. This is another one that is dealing with really big ideas and big issues in an age-appropriate way through a fantasy lens. So in this case, it's dealing with environmental degradation through strip mining, it's dealing with blood diamonds, it's dealing with enslavement, but again, through the lens of this kind of whimsical fantasy world. I think it's fantastic, it's really well done, more people should be picking this up, it's great. P. Djèlí Clark's work is always good, but I haven't seen as many people reading his middle grade book. Next is Eva Evergreen, Semi-Magical Witch by Julie Abe. This is adorable. It's going to be a good pick for people who are into Miyazaki films. It follows a young girl who is a novice witch, but she has just a tiny bit of magic and she has to complete a quest in order to become a full-fledged witch or a journeyman witchling, something like that. It's really lovely. She goes to the small town and tries to find ways to use the little bit of magic she has to help fix things and make things better for people, and kind of finds her own inner strength and grows. And she has a companion, Firefox, who's super cute. I love this. It's the first book in a duology. I haven't read book 2 yet, but book 1 was fantastic. I've read it a couple of times. I read it by myself and I read it with my kids. Next is Ghost Squad by Claribel Ortega. This is a great one for family and found family. It follows a family that runs ghost tours, but then things start going very, very wrong, and our young main character can see actual ghosts and has to try to find a way to save the family business before things get blown up. It's really charming. It's got friendship and family and ghosts, and it's cute. It's delightful. And if you read this and like it, her Witchlings book I think is even better, and I know there's 2 books in that series. I've only read the first one, but it's also a middle grade fantasy with characters who kind of feel like outsiders to a certain extent, and it's got friendship and it's great. So Claribel Ortega's books are really good. Another good one to check out is The Odds by Lindsay Puckett. We are mutuals and she'd sent me a copy of this for review, but I really liked this. It features a disabled heroine who has chronic pain. She's an orphan who lives in a retirement home with a bunch of magical grandparents, and she's waiting for her oddity or magical ability to come. If it doesn't come before she's 11, she'll lose her memory and be kind of cast out, and it's her trying to find a way to save the home and save herself. And I really loved this a lot. I think it's also great because it features a heroine who is dealing with chronic pain and isn't necessarily nice all the time. She's very prickly, and I think for understandable reasons. And I also just like that depiction for girls this age, that it's okay to be a girl who isn't just nice all the time to everybody, even if you do care deeply for the people you love. So I think that's good. Two more suggestions to go. The next one I think is well known, but I came to it a bit late. It's a Newbery winner. This is The Girl Who Drank the Moon by Kelly Barnhill. I love this. I would recommend this one for kids and adults. It's really beautiful. It's sad, but also fun and whimsical and beautifully written. It has so many layers to the story. It's about this town who, for reasons, believe that every year they have to leave a newborn in the swamp and sacrifice it to the witch for the town to do well. And every year there's this witch who is in the swamp and for some reason finds abandoned babies and doesn't know why, and goes and finds homes for them and feeds them starlight until she can find a home for them. Except one year there's this lovely young baby girl that she finds, and she accidentally feeds her moonlight instead of starlight, and she becomes too magical, and the witch raises her herself, and then it kind of goes from there. This one is lovely, but also heartbreaking, beautifully written, definitely one to check out. My final suggestion is a sci-fi fantasy blend, but I loved it. This is Dragon Pearl by Yoon Ha Lee. It is set in space and has spaceships in it, but it's also drawing on Korean mythology and the magic of the fox spirit. So we have a heroine who is descended from a long line of fox spirits who pretends to be someone she's not in order to go into space and look for her missing brother. It's really, really good. I think this is also a great option if you're looking for something age appropriate that is dealing a little bit with gender identity, because there is some transforming from one gender to another through magic, but also Yoon Ha Lee is trans. I think this is a way of kind of grappling with some of those things and people's ideas about gender in a way that makes sense for this age group. So Dragon Pearl is another great recommendation. So there you go, 18 book recommendations for middle grade fantasy that is not Harry Potter that I think are really, really good. I hope you found something new to go and check out. Talk to me in the comments down below. Let me know any of your thoughts or feelings on anything I talked about in this video. And for question of the day, I would love to hear two things from you. One is, which of these books do you want to go pick up after hearing about it? And number two is, do you have any additional middle grade fantasy recommendations that people should look into? Leave them in the comments down below. If you like this video, it always helps if you give it a thumbs up. Subscribe if you want to see more. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.